Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Very warm welcome to yet another session of Weekend with Wisdom. Today we have a very special guest, Shri Professor Arvind Sharma ji, joining all the way from Canada. Before we begin the session, let me start with a small prayer. Sada Shiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Ishvaro Guru Ratmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavatyapta Dehaya Shri Dakshina Murtaye Namaha. Welcome again. Thank you, Professor Arvind Sharma ji, for making time for this session. Viewers, to give a brief introduction, Dr. Arvind Sharma was formerly an IAS, and he is currently Birks Professor of Comparative Religion at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, where he has taught for the past 30 years. He has published extensively in the fields of comparative religion and Indian religions, as well as several books on Advaita Vedanta. He's very well-known scholar and author on various topics related to not only Vedanta but also on various aspects of Hindu philosophy, culture, and social issues. We are very fortunate to have you, sir. And on the behalf of entire Advaita Academy family and all our viewers, I warmly welcome you for our talk. And with this very brief opening remarks, I request you to start the session. And viewers, if you have any questions, please put it in Q&A box. And towards the last 5 or 10 minutes, Professor will take up those questions. Please start your session, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Nitinji. Yes. Okay. Let's make the best use of our time. I guess we have 1 hour, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And so you want me to speak for about 45 minutes and then have questions?
Yes, yes. 50 minutes and 10 minutes questions.
Yeah, from 45 to 50. Okay. So, as you probably already know, the topic of my presentation today is Advaita Vedanta in a modern accent. I think what I'd like to do is to take up some ideas and explore them with you. And I'll do this in different parts. In the first part, I intend to explore the philosophical dimension of Advaita Vedanta in a modern context. In the second part, the social dimension. And as a third part, the political. We may not get through all of them. Perhaps we'll only be able to go through the philosophical one in the time we have, but we shall see. So I now commence my presentation of the philosophical dimension of the topic, namely Advaita Vedanta with a modern accent. I would like to begin with the Mahavakyas. I guess I don't have to repeat the Mahavakyas for this audience because they are so well known, but because they are very brief, I might just as well recount them. Sarvam Khalidam Brahma, Soyam Atma Brahma, Ham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi. And according to some accounts, we have a fifth one, Prajnanam Brahma. I shall, however, stick to the 4 standard ones. Now, what is a Mahavakya? Literally, it means a great statement. And in the context of Advaita Vedanta, they are the basic insights in the light of which Advaita Vedanta studies the rest of the texts. They are almost like equations. And I say that because if we want to assess their significance, then we can think of some scientific equations. Consider, for instance, Einstein's E is equal to mc square. Now, this is the Mahavakya of physics. And just as Einstein's Mahavakya revolutionized modern physics, the Advaitic Mahavakyas revolutionized our philosophical thinking. So that is why the Mahavakyas are so important. Now I am going to suggest, and this is where the modern accent comes in, I am going to suggest that we need to look at these Mahavakyas once again. And on the basis of that, I will try to propose two, what at the moment I am going to call Anuvakyas. These are two statements which follow logically from the Mahavakyas. What I have in mind here is the identity of the Atman and the Brahman, which is celebrated in the Mahavakyas. Now, what does it mean? What does this identity mean? At one level, it means that at the ultimate level, there is no difference between one jiva and another, and even between the jiva and Ishwar. That is to say, there is really no difference ultimately between you and me, and between us and God, or the ultimate reality. And as you know, the usual example is given, a very helpful one, that it is like a number of pots. And each pot can have a different shape or form, just as we as individuals can have different shapes and forms. And there can be a master pot. That would be Ishwar. But if all these pots are broken, then we will discover that the space in all of them was just the same, was identical. The differences among the jivas and the jivas and Ishwar is entirely, this is very important, is entirely a matter of the upadhis, the adjuncts, like the pot which surrounds the space and can have different shapes and so on, size and so on. Now, I would like to suggest that in our own times, we need to look at this identity very carefully. Because it means, ultimately, that there is no difference between you and me and you. So I would like to formulate the Anuvakya, Aham Tomasi. Aham Tomeva. I am you. And then the second Anuvakya, Tom Ahameva. You are me. Now, why am I suggesting this? I am suggesting this because this indicates that we have a profound philosophical source within Advaita for undergirding equality or egalitarianism. If all of us are the same, if you and I are the same, then we should be treated equally. Each should treat the other equally. And all of us should be treated equally. Now you might say, so far so good. But we are at the parimarthic level now, right? We're at the metaphysical level. What about the vyavaharic level, the practical level? After all, we do have upadhis at the practical level. You and I are different at that level. Your height is not as mine. Your complexion may be different from me, and so on. Now, let me share with you how this point is sometimes treated in the Advaitic text or in the Advaitic frame of reference so far. The point is made that the difference between this identity at the paramarthic level cannot be moved to identity at the empirical level. And as an example, I might refer to the famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavi Hastini Shuni Chaiva Shvapakecha Pandita Samadarshina. It's in a sense making the point I'm trying to make, Samadarshina. But often, in considering this verse, you get the kind of glosses or commentaries, Sama Darshina, Kintu na Samavartina. Don't behave to them in the same way. Now, this is an empirical reality. Father and son behave to each other in a different way. But what I'm trying to say now is, or the direction in which I try to move this argument is, that the point about equality which is being made here is not empirical, but moral. That is to say, if we have this background that we are really identical, then that identity can be expressed at the level of practical life in the form of equality, or at least as the search for equality, the quest for equality. So this is one proposal I would like to make, that in modern times, we interpret the Mahavakyas as emphasizing the identity between all of us as expressed in the Anuvakyas. And on the basis of that, we can propose that we should use these metaphysical insights of Advaita Vedanta to make a strong case for equality as mirroring or reflecting at the Vyavaharic level, at the practical level, the identity at the, which we have talked about, at the ultimate level or the Paramarthika level. Now we have a precedent of that in the way we consider karma. Are we not all equal before the doctrine of karma or the law of karma? We will get our results in accordance with our actions, all of us, without discrimination of any kind. In fact, our commitment to this principle is so strong that sometimes in the Hindu ethos, even the gods are supposed to be subject to karma. And sometimes the death of Krishna at the hand of the hunter is explained as the karmic consequence of the killing of Sugriva's brother by Ram under less than chivalrous circumstances. So here we already have a resource pointing in the direction of equality, and we can reinforce it with the metaphysics of Advaita Vedanta. This is my first point. I now move to the second. The second point I would like to initiate by referring to one of the three foundational texts of the former school of Advaita Vedanta, the Prasthanatraya, or the Trayi. The Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, or perhaps I should first say Brahma Sutra, and then the Bhagavad Gita. I'd like to look at the first, or rather, I would like to take another look at the first sutra of the Brahma Sutra, which is Athato Brahma Jijyasa. Now we want to know about the ultimate reality. I would now like to contrast this word Jijyasa with the word Mumuksha. Jijyasa is the desire to know. Mumuksha is the desire to become free. And here, to become liberated from the cycle of karma and Purarjanma, karma and rebirth. Now, the primary impression I have gained from the study of the Advaitic texts is that they seem to emphasize mumuksha as our main motive for seeking the knowledge of Advaita Vedanta. I formed this impression on the basis of numerous accounts in which the disciple approaches the Guru, saying that he is burning in the fire of samsara and wants to be saved. perhaps I can place my point on even firmer ground by pointing out that in the not Prasthanatraya, I just refer to that in the Sadhan Chatushtaya, sorry about that confusion. In the Sadhan Chatushtaya, we have the first as Vivek, Nityanitya Vivek. We have the second as Tyag, Ihamutapal Tyag. And then we have the third as Sadhan, again, beg your pardon, Shat Sampat, the 6 qualities one needs to study Advaita. And finally, Mumukshatva, the desire to be free. I think in the Vivek Chudamani, Shankaracharya says that these 3 things are rare. Trayam ekatya durlabham. All these 3 things together are rare. Manushyatvam, Mumukshatvam, Mahapurusha, Sanshaya. What I'm going to suggest is that in relation to Advaita in our own times, we should also accord a greater recognition to the possibility that our motive for studying Advaita Vedanta may not necessarily be Mumuksha, but that it can also be Jijyasa. We may just want to know what the ultimate reality is. I'd like to elaborate this point by drawing upon a distinction between fact and value. It is a fact that food supports life. But because our lives are involved, this fact becomes a value. So what I'm trying to suggest is that one may want to know the ultimate reality as a matter of fact, that it exists and I want to know it. The emphasis so far in the way I have learned of Advaita is on Mumuksha as a value. The ultimate reality, not as a fact, but as a value that will save me from samsara. I say this because one may have a genuine desire to know, just to know what the ultimate reality is, without being necessarily involved in the further point about what are the consequences of knowing it, which convert it into a value. So one may come to the study of Advaita Vedanta not out of a desire to get rid of suffering of any kind, but out of the sheer desire to know what the ultimate reality is and how it can be experienced. So this was my second point. My first point was how we might extend our discussion of the Mahavakyas in the form of the Anuvakyas. and what its likely consequences are going to be or could be. My second point pertained to the distinction between Jijyasa and Mumuksha. And I cited the first sutra from the Brahma Sutra at the very beginning to make my point that the text says not athato Brahma, athva athato Mumuksha. Now I want to be free. But athato Brahma Jijyasa. Now I move on to the third point. And the third point has to do with the concept of Maya and how we can give it a new turn in our own time without violating the basic spirit of the system of Advaita Vedanta. Now, what is Maya? I think we need to get this point across, or rather, we need to understand this point, or rather, I must share with you the way I understand this point to make the further points which I want to make about it. For me, the doctrine of Maya arises in the following context. We have our experience of the universe, in which we are a subject, as distinguished from the objects with which we interact all the time, and as a subject distinguished from other subjects, as a jiva other than other jivas. So the most prominent feature of our ordinary, and one could probably even say normal from a certain point of view, existence is the experience of diversity. This is our experienced truth. Let us call it the proximate truth. If we are going to develop the point in English. So our proximate experience of the world is that of diversity, which seems real to us. Now here comes Advaita Vedanta and says, the ultimate reality is without diversity. In fact, Advaita Vedanta is reluctant even to use the word unity for it. That is why it says it is Advaita, not two, meaning undivided. Soul spiritual reality. Soul reality. Now, these are very contradictory positions. Approximate truth is approximate truth and ultimate truth represent this very contradictory. These two very contradictory positions. How are we to relate them to each other? I think this is the problem the concept of Maya tries to deal with. Now let me give you two examples from our normal life, just to underscore this point. In our normal life also, we have such experiences where the proximate truth and the ultimate truth are radically different. And to make this point, let me appeal to two experiences of ours on the basis of which we lead our normal lives. If you go from your home to a shopping mall, which is about, say, 30 miles away, at a considerable distance, do you take any precaution that you might roll off the earth because it is a sphere, because it is round? Normally, you can't walk steadily for long on a curved surface. You will topple. But we don't do that. Right here we can see that the ultimate truth is that the earth is a sphere. The proximate truth is that the earth is flat. How do we connect the two? By saying the earth appears as flat. Well, the Advaita Vedantic word for this appearance is Maya. Similarly, every morning we get up with the sunrise and we say, the sun has risen. Our statement, sun has risen, is made on the basis of our experience that the earth goes around the sun. I beg your pardon. Sorry, please disregard that. That the sun goes around the earth. It rises in the morning. It reaches its meridian at midday, and it sets in the evening. But the first thing we are told in our geography class, and among the very first things, is that the earth goes around the sun. So we lead our daily life on the basis that the sun goes around the earth. That's the approximate truth. The ultimate truth in terms of geography is that the earth goes around the sun. How are we to explain this? The sun appears to go around. That's how it is explained to us. Again, we have Maya. Okay. So, the concept of Maya is essentially comes into play when we have to deal with two such contradictory phenomena, one of which constitute a proximate truth, and another which constitutes the ultimate truth. Now let us see what we can do to this idea of Maya in a modern context. what we can do in a modern context is to suggest that an ultimate reality is under an obligation to be always real. The ultimate reality must always be real. Or if we substitute the word reality with a capital R, and then we can say reality must always be real. From this it follows that reality must always be. This is our version of Trikal, Abadit. Which implies that reality must always be what it is, must always be, and therefore must always be self-consistent. This is crucial. It must always be self-consistent. A proximate reality, or what we are calling proximate reality, is under no such obligation because it is an appearance. Now this has very deep metaphysical significance for us in terms of Advaita Vedanta. Because we have the doctrine of Advaita Vedanta that although Maya or Prakriti is unreal, ultimately, it exhibits spatial, temporal, and causal consistency. We will leave the question of to what degree it displays this consistency apart for a while. We will return to that. The point I am trying to make is that an appearance is under no obligation to be self-consistent. Let me illustrate this point. If we have a mirror in front of us, and the mirror has been built with the idea of reflecting us exactly as we are. There are no curves, no convexity, no concavity in it. So our body would be reflected as it is. But if we stand before a concave or a convex mirror, our body, same body, will appear distorted. Because it's an appearance here. It's also an appearance in the first case, when the mirror is exactly as it should be. What I'm trying to highlight is that an appearance could aim at reflecting the reality as it is, or the appearance could grossly distort things. It is under no obligation to be self-consistent as an appearance. It may be. So this leaves us room to keep traditional Advaita in place. Because if the universe shows temporal, spatial, and causal regularity or consistency, or we have the law of karma in it, you might argue that this is consistent. But of course, our position is complicated by the fact that the two realities are very different. In this case, the proximate and the ultimate, which is not the case in the case of the mirror. The convolution I want to introduce in the modern accent is that because the appearance is under no obligation to be self-consistent, under no obligation to be self-consistent, then if we accept this point, then it has very important implications for philosophy and science. I see I have only 5 minutes left for the questions, so I'll just complete this point and then we'll have questions. What are these complications which emerge now? In the case of philosophy, we have the following point to deal with. There's a branch of philosophy called theodicy, which has to do with the explanation of suffering, especially as consistent with God. If God is all powerful, God is all merciful, God is all knowing, then how come we suffer? There are various explanations offered in response to this question. In the Hindu context, we often bring out the idea of karma. But if the appearance or proximate reality is under no obligation to be self-consistent, then you can have, metaphysically, you can have suffering. Because there is no philosophical requirement that it not be there. The metaphysics now allows it. So, this suggestion has a very profound significance for theodicy. Now, what is its significance for science? Now we know modern science, with the rise of the West, has taken enormous strides. And we have more and more sophisticated explanations. First we got the atom was split. Then we finer divisions of matter. Quarks, boson, I just can't keep track of it. I'm not a physicist, but I know that it's an ongoing search as to what is the ultimate constituent unit of matter. If you consulted physics 50 years ago, they would have given you a different answer. If you had done that 25 years ago, you would get a different answer. If we ask the physicists now, we will get a different answer. But what I am trying to suggest is that if what I am saying is true, then 30 years from now, we will get a different answer. And 100 years from now, still a different answer. Because matter, as part of this appearance, is under no obligation to be self-consistent. I think I'll stop there so that we have some time for questions.
Thank you, Professor. It was a wonderful, very reflective and insightful session. Viewers, if you have any questions now, please type it out in Q&A. Sir, I have a question. I want to, you ended towards the end of your session, you mentioned about theodicy and the problem of evil. And I have been kind of reflecting upon this problem for some time. And what I realized is that the problem, the statement of the problem itself is problematic. I think that the biggest issue with the problem of evil is the statement of the problem of evil itself. To say that if God has to be, for example, the notion of God as being compassionate means that there should not be a suffering in the world. That is a expectation that we are superimposing on the idea of God. I think that is a kind of adhyasa as well. That need not be the case. I mean, for example, and this problem of evil does not take into account another aspect, which is the aspect of justice, of the wherein the doctrine of karma comes. What you sow, so you reap. I mean, whatever actions you do, you have to give the result. So even this giving the result for good action or bad action, in the case of bad action, it will be sorrow. That is also a kind of compassion, because Jiva is being made rid of his bad fruits from his past actions and taken towards moksha. So I would like to hear your thoughts on this more.
Yeah. So if we go by the Upanishads, then we have to go to Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Eko devaha sarvabhuteshu guraha sarvavyapi sarvabhutantaratma karmadhyaksha sarvabhutadivasa cheta nirgunascha kevala cheto. I'm forgetting the last few lines. Words, sorry. Okay. So he is karmadhyaksha. He is the supervisor of karma. So God becomes involved. Now this God is Satchidanand. What happens to Anand? I mean, I'm just suggesting that this is one angle to review, what you have been saying. I'm not taking any position. I'm just suggesting this is something we have to look into. How do we get around that? Yeah. Now we have justice, fine. But you see, justice is also often considered alongside mercy. And I think Nilkant, I may got the name wrong, but there is a medieval thinker in Tamil Nadu who says God, who will be taken in by your argument that you are suffering because of your karma. Why? Because you are karmadhyaks. You are the law maker. The lawmaker can always suspend the law. So this is another angle to take into account. It's a very vexed question, yeah, the suffering point.
Yeah, interesting.
But I like Ramana Maharshi's answer to the question, why do we suffer? Ramana Maharshi gave several answers on several occasions. But on one occasion he said, to make you ask that question.
So I think that suffering itself can be seen as a kind of mercy or kindness or compassion. So
Yeah.
that was the point.
No, that's fine. The way in philosophy we express it is that punishment need not always be punitive. It is also redemptive. Because you get rid of your bad karma also. So it goes both ways.
We have two questions, sir, and I'll just read out the first one. It's based on a social reflection. The understanding of Advaita has been with us since reception of Upanishads. Yet the fissures, schisms, and fault lines in society are deep and appearing to be growing. How can this teaching be enacted in the world to ensure a more just and equal society while still recognizing individual and group differences?
You see the two levels of truth in Advaita. Yeah, actually three, but two, the practical and the ultimate. The great merit of that distinction is that you can combine plurality and unity. I'm using the word unity loosely here. We have seen the limitation of that in relation to the ultimate reality. So, there is this structure of thought which gives us a way of bridging the gap between plurality and unity. And I think that should be explored with a view of solving our social issues. I'd like to add something to that, very useful question, as to why this has not happened so far. After all, we have had the Upanishads for thousands of years, right? We have had Advaita for thousands of years, right? So I have a theory about that. I don't know whether it is true or not, but my impression is that the reason this has not happened is that Advaita Vedanta did not become major strand in Hindu thought till around Shankara's time and after Shankara. Before that, it was Purvamimamsa, which was the dominant school. Our social norms and rules were laid down by smritis, which were composed when the dominant mode of thought was Mimamsic and not Advaitic. But by the time it became Advaitic, after Shankara gradually, we lost political independence. Right? For 800 years, you have not had control over your political destiny. You are fighting for your life. When you are back to your wall, then you are not going to be philosophically and socially creative. You are in the defensive mode. You are just trying to save what you have, not improve it. You try to improve it only to the extent that you think it might help you in facing the crisis. So now is the time to do it. This is what I'm trying to say.
We have one more last question, sir. This is basically a query. If the question, their question is, if I and Ishvara, if Jiva and Ishvara are same, then is it that have we forgotten our true self, or is this the real purpose of our life?
I didn't get the last part.
I think they are trying to ask if Jiva and Ishvara are same, but we don't realize this. Is it because we have forgotten our real self, the true self, or this coming upon to this realization itself is the real purpose of life?
That is the Advaitic position. Yeah. So this identity will become self-evident to the person, the Jivan Mukta. For the Jivan Mukta, right, the person who is, the Advaitic goal is Jivan Mukti. Yeah? You achieve this while you are alive. So the person who is what is called embodied liberation or living liberation, that person will see it like a fruit in one's hand, as clearly as an object in one's palm.
Yeah, that's I think the objective one's hand. I think that one of the students of Shankara was named
Stamara.
Hastamaraka. Yes. It was a very interesting, very insightful discussion, Professor Arvind. And on the behalf of entire Advaita Academy and all our audience, I like to extend thank you for making this time, and hopefully we can do more sessions like this in future. Thank you, sir.
My privilege. I would welcome any other opportunity to discuss these matters. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Namaste. Viewers, with this, we come to a conclusion of yet another session. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We have a Twitter, we have a Facebook discussion group as well. Please join that and join discussion on Vedanta. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha.